What is going on YouTube? Kronos here and welcome back to the PSO2 video. So today's video we're actually going to be going over some affix formulas that you guys can use for your newly acquired Klauz weapons. I know not everyone wants to sit down and make Guardian Soul, and to be perfectly honest, though definitely worth it if you're trying to push that min-max setup for yourself, there are a lot of other options that a lot of people don't seem to know about that I wanted to share with you guys today. Quick disclaimer, these are a lot of formulas that I've put together on my own. They can be tweaked and I actually plan to show how you can tweak them to match your build. These formulas are going to be catered towards melee power. Of course, in most cases, you can just swap those things out, might for precision, graceful might for graceful precision, or grand, so on and so forth, depending upon what it is you might have. Remember, the idea behind these are to work within your own budget to figure out what's going to work best for you. Because I'm going to be real with you, Guardian Soul ain't for everyone. But that doesn't mean you have to full on sacrifice power overall. And that's kind of what I wanted to show you guys today. So we're going to have all of these, essentially I'm going to have them labeled in the video description. You can pick whichever one you're looking for. They're going to be in range starting from the very easiest and the very simplistic to a bit of the more complex ones. And you'll see what I mean as time goes on. But let's go ahead and jump into this. I don't normally do this mid video, but I did want to go ahead and mention to you guys, I'm going to try to push out a lot more PSO2 content moving forward and pushing forward towards NGS. If you guys like these types of videos, and you're new to the channel, go ahead and click a little subscribe button. Subscribe, yeah, if I could speak, but it's completely free and you guys will be able to keep up with all the content itself, and the like button's free too. It does help out a ton. But let's jump into this. So we're gonna start off really basic, really simple. This affix is just for someone who's like, hey, you know what, I've got my weapon, I want to go ahead and I want it to be strong, but I don't want to break the bank on what I'm looking to do. So we're going Astral Soul, Might 6, or again, of course, any main stat you like to go with, and Graceful Might. Now, you can't always opt to go with something else. Now, I always say when it comes to weapons, you don't need to all stat weapons. Weapons always have a specific stat they're going for, and we're looking at Klauz weapons in today's video. So pick the main stat of the weapon that you're going to be using, slot that into there. All of the dim weapons, they're SAF, and we'll talk about this more in the video itself. Just so you guys are aware, SAF means special augment factor. Essentially, it's a guaranteed augment you can put onto a weapon when the weapon is plus 35. So I'm going to abbreviate that as SAF from this point on in the video itself. So SAF essentially. So the SAF of dim weapons are main stat. You can just grab a dim weapon off of the market. 8 slots aren't that expensive nowadays. They drop pretty regularly, or if you're someone who'd rather farm it out yourself, there's something you can get pretty commonly from Divide Quest. Just if you do Divide Quest itself, what is it, 30 or 26 through 30, usually these tend to pop up pretty often. I've cubed a ton of these beforehand and they don't sell for very much nowadays, so nothing too crazy. But Astral Soul again is an SAF for Union weapons, or for what's the other weapon I'm thinking of, Union or Ray. So I would go ahead and hop and grab one of those. They're usually not too expensive. The prices should be fairly down at the time of the video of this video recording, because a boost, not a boost week, but a bonus day, PSO2 day, that's the word I'm looking for, I can't speak. PSO2 day has just recently popped along, and people have been doing rainbow keys, which tends to drop more Union weapons. So usually those will be a little bit down in price. Just check all of the different categories for the types of Union weapons. I know it can be a bit of a pain, but check Rays, check Unions, and you will find something fairly cheap. I think the most I spent on mine was and the most I've seen as far as expenses go, probably close to about like 100 to 200k, so nothing too crazy. And that's for an 8 slot, which is kind of crazy. And then of course you have a pop item. In this case, we're going Graceful Might. If you happen to have a grand, go for it. I know grand mites at the time of recording this are 40 mil a piece, so some people are opting not to. Totally understandable. Graceful Might works perfectly fine. And as a bonus, a bit of information too. On NGS, Grace and Grand actually are being counted as the same thing for the affix moving forward. So though on PSO2 it would be very strong, in NGS it will be equal. So if that's something that makes a break for you, there you go, something to keep in mind there. So not too difficult to figure out though. Moving over, we have our phrase decay setup. Now, if you're a class like Hunter, or if you play Phantom, or if you only play in groups, you're more likely going to have the target have gelin on them pretty commonly. So having phrase decay on your weapon is actually going to net you more damage overall. In this situation, it's actually not too difficult to put this together. Reality, all you're going to need is an Astral Soul weapon, which we talked about beforehand, which is just a Union or a Ray weapon at 8 slots, and a phrase decay weapon, which the phrase decay weapons are the Basilisk weapons. Those drop pretty commonly, so the 8 slot versions of those aren't too expensive. And then of course a pop item, in this case Graceful Might, but you can choose whatever you'd like. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Just get them grounded up, get them 8, or make sure they're 8 slots. And honestly, you can buy these off the market, so it's not too crazy expensive for you, and you get a fairly powerful weapon. Now, moving forward, we can go a little bit more, or a little bit further. Instead of using something like a main stat, we can go something like Mana Reverie. Mana Reverie is going to an extra smidge of main stat, not a whole lot more, but it is more powerful than the main stat itself. So in this case, we'll have to do a little bit of arranging of things here. We're going to need, of course, the Astral Soul fodder, but we're also going to need fodder for Reverie Catalyst. So the SAF for Reverie Catalyst is the Profound Weapons. I know people have probably popped up doing, what is it? Not PD, but Persona pretty often. And the weapons that you use to make the Trailblazer weapons, their SAF is Reverie Catalyst. So you'll need at least one of those. If you grab one of those plus 35 of them and then use it to augment your Astral Soul weapon, you can put Reverie Catalyst on it. Of course, you can also put Reverie Catalyst onto your main stat weapon itself. That works as well. And then leave, your Astral Soul weapon alone. But in reality, it doesn't matter where you put it. You have to put it in one of those two spots. So either the main fodder or in fodder 1 works well. You can then technically purchase Reverie Catalyst at 8 slot for the other ones. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more expensive. Granted, we're not in Guardian Soul range just yet, but it is a bit more expensive overall. But these do drop from Omega Luther, and they do drop at 8 slots on weapons. So that can be something you go for. And then, of course, the Omega Memoria. You can opt to make that on your own, but honestly, I would recommend just buying it. I happen to have the leftover fodder just from running Omega Luther to get my Atlas units. So I would say go ahead and jump into that, get that taken care of. It's not too difficult to make, and it will net you a little bit of extra damage. Not a ton of extra damage, but a smidge and a little bit extra PP while you're along with it. It's mostly the PP that you're actually looking for than just the extra damage, but it is still more damage, so it's worth mentioning regardless. Now, in case we care more about the damage than the PP, we can always replace Astral Soul with Mana Reverie instead. So we'd be dropping the augment factor that we use for Astral Soul and use Mana Reverie. Basically the exact same setup. All you're doing is swapping one of your weapons. Basically the spot where you would usually use the Astral Soul weapon, you use a dim weapon. So super easy there, nothing too crazy to talk about. It's just gonna be a little bit less PP, but a bit more damage overall. And again, with these situations where you're getting more damage, less PP, so on and so forth, keep in mind these are raw stats. Raw stats aren't insanely powerful, so don't break the bank over something if you can't afford it. This is all about what you personally can afford and what you're gonna be doing moving forward towards NGS itself. Or actually towards base, I say towards NGS, but towards base PSO2 in your time playing base PSO2. Keep in mind, this will still be of use later on down the line too. And then, of course, we would be remiss without mentioning, again, another Phrase Decay setup. In this situation, I would just go Mana Reverie, Grace, and Phrase Decay. Pretty straightforward. Just replace what you replaced beforehand with a Phrase Decay SAF weapon, and you're good to go. Everything else stays exactly the same. Very, very simple. I mentioned it earlier, but I'll mention it again really quick. But essentially, this is just if you are someone who plays in groups consistently, or if you're a class that can always make sure that Gellen's on the target. Phrase Decay is 5% damage increase, which is very, very powerful. So basically, if you're always playing in MPAs and groups, you're not really playing solo or anything along those lines, this is definitely something you should go ahead and jump into. But if you're a solo player, you like to do solo challenges, you're not a class like, say, Phantom or Hunter that can constantly have Gellen up, or in some cases, certain class comp or certain setups like Hero can set up to have their own Gellen up all the time as well with certain SA or with certain S grade augments, then you really don't want to worry too much about this. But I figured I'd go ahead and show this to you guys. This is basically going to be the last of the Phrase Decay setups that I will show you, because at this point you're looking at Mana and you're looking at Grace or Grand, which is going to be some of the biggest damage you can get out of it, on top of just the amount of PP that you'll be getting to. So this next one is what you actually would have seen in the video that I did showing you guys making my Klauz weapon. This is what I personally did with my Klauz DBs. And this actually can be tooled around a few different ways. This is one of the situations where I mentioned that you can kind of set this up however you'd like. Now, in this case, I went Divine, Mana, and Grand. It is pretty much one of the stronger setups that you can put together without using Guardian Soul. But it does require a Divine Receptor, which they are fairly expensive. So if you happen to have those receptors, you want to go ahead and use them, by all means, now is the time. However, you have to be very careful on how you actually set this up. So what I personally did was I went ahead and got a weapon with the Reverie Catalyst SAF, and I had my Divine Receptor, and I went ahead and affixed my main fodder weapon, so basically my base weapon, with Divine Receptor and Reverie Catalyst at 8 slot. So made sure that I had it all set up there. Then of course we had the 3 Reverie Catalysts, we had an Omega Memoria, this gives us Mana Reverie, and then we had a Divine Order weapon at 8 slot. Yes, it was expensive. Yes, it's going to go down in price when we get the new version of of divide, but honestly, for me, I had the money, I didn't mind to spend it. I wanted to set up a good weapon, so nothing too crazy to go from there. Now, this can also be augmented or changed up a little bit. You can set this up differently, basically by swapping out the divine receptor and the divine order. Say you have exceed instead. You can use an exceed receptor and exceed energy. I actually did this for all 3 of my weapons. One of them had divine, one had exceed, and one actually had mark. So you can do this for all 3 of your weapons if you decide to, or however you want to set it up, but that's what I personally did and how I had them set it up. Of course, the one that's set up with mark is the weakest of all of them, so keep that in mind. So this next setup is if you just happen to have the setup for this, you want to spend the money. Now, some people might ask, why would you spend so much money on setting up a weapon if, you're not going to do something like Guardian Soul? Well, to be perfectly honest, some people just find Guardian Soul to create very cumbersome, very tiring, and they don't really want to go through those steps. This is actually easier overall to make, even though it is just as expensive, if not more expensive in some situations, but does net you quite a bit of damage overall. This is my Divine Exceed Grand setup. This is if I was only going to have one weapon and I didn't want to do Guardian Soul, this is exactly what I'd go for. Essentially, you need to basically set up is having an Exceed Energy weapon, a Divine Order weapon, and then have Exceed Receptor and Divine Receptor on some form of the fodder in your setup overall. The cool thing about this is if you're someone who didn't scratch during the support scratch and you don't have those capsules, you can buy these off of other players on the market. Granted, it's going to be fairly expensive. Or if you happen to have a buddy who just likes to wail and they have that set up here for you, you cannot technically get these set up without getting it from another player or having a hold of that capsule. I didn't mention this earlier, but our previous setup, you wouldn't have needed the capsule to put the actual receptor on your base weapon, or you would need someone else to set up the capsule on another weapon for you with exactly what you're looking for and then sell it to you, which was much more difficult to do. That setup was mostly for people who already had the receptors on their end and they didn't need anyone else to do it for them. And this way you can buy these with the receptors on them, but it's going to be fairly expensive. And I would be remiss not to go ahead and show a Phrase Decay setup. In this situation, we would basically drop Exceed Energy for Phrase Decay. We would just have a Phrase Decay fodder set up in there, and we'd be all good to go. Divine, Grand, and Phrase Decay. Now, I will say that if you're going to go for Divine, Exceed, Grand setup itself, just as a quick callback, that's not netting you any more damage technically than swapping out Exceed with Mana. Mana Reverie is still going to be the exact amount of damage. It's just a bit less PP, and also you don't get extra substats. You're not getting the extra defense and all of those sorts of things there. But it's still just as strong. And then comparatively to the Guardian Soul setup, of course, Guardian Soul is going to net you an extra 2 PP over the setup we have. It's going to net you that extra HP, which will be fairly nice. And then, of course, the extra defenses and the 20 extra main stat power. That's right. It's only an extra 20 main stat over setting something up like, say, Divine, Grand, and Mana, which is why I personally decided to go ahead and go for it for my weapons themselves. I know I'm going to be making Guardian Soul for my units. All 3 units are already almost done with setting everything up. Just need a couple more things and waiting for boost week. But for my weapons, I'll be making a lot of weapons, and I wanted to make sure that I was able to afford to make all of those weapons. I didn't want to make Guardian Soul for all of them. They were kind of a bit of a pain, and I wasn't really prepared for Guardian Soul on weapons like I should have been, so I just decided to opt not to make them. And I also wanted to share with you guys these setups here. So hopefully you guys can decide what will work best for you and understand that you are not completely left out if you decide not to make Guardian Soul. Yes, it's powerful. Yes, it's the end all be all. Yes, if that's what you want to work towards, by all means, go for it. Don't let anyone tell you that it's not worth it, because worth is up to the individual. It's up to what you feel like is worth it to you. Maybe making Guardian Soul super exciting for you. Maybe having the strongest weapons and the strongest units in the game is what you look for, is how you have the fun and how you have the most fun in the game itself. But maybe that's not exactly what you look for. Maybe you're going to be someone who wants to just have enough and then push your skill as high as you possibly can with what you have access to. Or maybe you're just looking to have fun. Everyone is different. So I wanted to bring this to you guys to give you a different option available to you itself. Anyway, guys, I know this is a bit of a longer video. I appreciate you guys sticking through all the way to the end. It's a lot of information to cover. So at any point in time, feel free to pause, take a look at the formulas. If you have any questions, feel free to toss them in the comments below. I'm going to toss all the formulas in the video description. Again, I will just try to number them. That way they're easier to see, or find some other way of labeling them. I'm not sure. We'll figure that all out at the very end, or at some point in the near future. As always, guys, a like on the video is super appreciated and absolves you half your ad block. The other half is as well by subscribing. Both are completely free and help me out a ton. If you guys want to keep up with the content, make sure to go ahead and click on that bell icon to be notified of videos as they go live, as well as community posts, or join us over on Discord or follow me over on Twitter for notifications via those 2 avenues. Thanks again so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care. Peace out.